Welcome. I'm Jason Ross with the LaRouche Organization, and I'm very happy to have a chance to speak today with Dr. Kelvin Kemm, a South African nuclear scientist, former board chairman of the South African Nuclear Energy Corporation, and the CEO of Stratec Business Strategy Consultants. Dr. Kemm, thank you for being here with us today.
Well, thank you very much, Jason. I'm very pleased to be with you.
So EIR, Executive Intelligence Review, has published a report called The Great Leap Backward. LaRouche exposes the Great Reset. It covers the anti-development and population limiting or reducing intents behind the flurry of proposals and policies to reorient finance and politics around green energy. So from that standpoint, Dr. Kemm, I'd like to ask you about energy. There was an unusually cold period in Texas just recently, in the US state of Texas, where there was an energy disaster. The cold temperatures froze up wind turbines, snow was dumped on solar panels, heating demand was driven upward, and there were other problems caused with other aspects of physical energy production, including to some degree with natural gas. What is your take on what happened in Texas? Does this tell us anything about the drive towards increasing investment in wind and solar?
Well, here I am sitting in Pretoria, where it's been particularly hot, and we've been getting stories about freezing Texas. And I was a guest speaker at Texas A&M a couple of years ago, not in the cold weather, but I can sit here and just imagine what it's like in Texas. So I've got great sympathy for them. Well, I think that what has been shown by this is that what you need is reliability. And you must try to avoid putting any fluctuations in that you don't need. Now, it's very interesting to watch this because I discovered when I was there that Texas is not connected to the rest of the US grid for various historical reasons. So it's interesting to watch Texas as almost like a separate country at the moment, operating all on its own. And Texas has been driving towards wind and solar for a while now, which is linked to this whole philosophy of reducing carbon dioxide, which I'm one of the people that does not believe in, but maybe we come to that later. But I think what is indicated there too is that electricity consumption is going to go up. In the last 25 years, approximately, world electricity consumption has doubled. Here in South Africa, we have 85% electrification in the country. The last 15% is people living voluntarily on hilltops or very far away. South Africa is very big, by the way. South Africa is the same size as the whole of Western Europe added together. So I'm in Pretoria at the moment. Cape Town is right at the bottom of the country, but the distance from Pretoria to Cape Town is the same as Rome to London. So when we look at our challenges, they're completely different to Europe, and there's too much of a tendency here. So, oh, well, the Germans are doing it this way, the so-and-so are doing it that way. Why don't we follow suit? It's completely different over there to what we have here. So one's got to look at the circumstances and say, now what? Now we're 85% electrified. There are many African countries that are 15% electrified, 20% electrified. Our objective must be to double electricity consumption. A lot of those other African countries have got to double it again, then double it again, and then double it again. So some of these stories you hear from green extremists to say, cut electricity consumption worldwide, cut back. It's just not on. I can't see why in the next 25 years, the world is not going to double its electricity consumption. In fact, I think it'll go faster. There's more and more electrical devices coming out every day. I saw some figures just the other day that was staggering for the amount of electricity that is just used by Bitcoin mining around the world. It's the size of an entire country. Now, this type of thing is going to continue. So I think we need to get our psychology right. The world is going to double its electricity consumption. So is Texas. Certainly in South Africa, we have to, and in other African countries, they've got to do a lot more than that. So therefore, using the Texas illustration that you asked, they must look to double their electricity consumption. This means take all the uncertainties out that you possibly can so that you're not faced with a very difficult situation to manage. And to my mind, wind and solar and all these things now just add complications to your life. Why do that?
Well, now, so I kind of want to go in two directions now. One is to find out more of your views about the goals of trying to reduce carbon dioxide. let's come right back to that after a question about solar and wind, because the proponents of these technologies, you're right, many of them believe that overall we shouldn't be increasing energy production, which gives you a sense of what the priorities are. But we hear that solar and wind, that these technologies are always improving, that windmill design is improving, that new manufacturing techniques or discoveries in materials are improving solar panels. Is there a limit to how far these technologies can improve, or is this the sort of thing where the sky is the limit?
Well, undoubtedly, solar and wind have improved dramatically. One only has to look at the original windmills of Holland a couple of 100 years ago and the wind turbines of today. And bear in mind, incidentally, that Albert Einstein got the Nobel Prize for explaining the photoelectric effect, not for relativity at the time. So this has been known for over a century, how solar works, and there's been great strides. But yes, there are limitations. The sunlight hits the ground at about 1 kilowatt a square meter. Out of that 1 kilowatt a square meter, you can only extract about 15% for solar electricity, because that's the blue end of the spectrum. You can do certain heating with the other end of the spectrum, but you can get 15% of 1 kilowatt a square meter for solar, and that's that. And that is only during the daytime and only during the middle of the daytime, when the sun is vertical to the solar collector, unless you've got a very sophisticated one that's following the sun and so on. The same happens with wind. There's a limit in physics called the Betz limit, and the Betz limit tells you can't get more than 59.3% of the energy out of a wind flow, no matter what. Call it 60% for a round figure. That's all you're going to get. Then people say, well, build a bigger wind turbine. That you can do. If you build a bigger wind turbine, though, these rules tell you they've got to be further apart. So there's also an amount of electricity that can be extracted per square kilometer out of wind, and that's that. You can't keep packing them or making them bigger. They've got to get further apart if they're bigger. So there's a limitation, and that is the limitations of physics, let alone the other limitations, which are, of course, when the wind blows and when the sun's not available, like nighttime. Solar, generally speaking, gives you about a quarter of what's called its nameplate energy. And I get so irritated when somebody says 100 megawatts of solar has just been installed. This can power so many 1,000 houses. They don't say only at lunchtime and not at all at night. So if you see 100 megawatts of solar, it means 25% of that on average over the year, if you're lucky and not on rainy days and such like. Wind will give you about 1/3 on average over a year, and some days nothing. Of course, your real snag is when the wind drops at night. Then you've got neither. So now you've got to say to yourself, I've introduced all these instabilities and uncertainties. So the next step that people talk about, well, why don't we have batteries so that we can now charge the battery, so when the wind stops at night and there's a dip, we fill it up with the battery. But the battery has come about not because it's a good engineering solution. It's a solution to try and solve the bad problem of the wind, because the wind isn't constant. So you got one bad solution trying to solve another bad solution. Then what people don't tell you, if they say build a battery, you can't use the same wind turbine to charge the battery, because when it's charging, you're using it. You can't use the same solar panel to charge a battery that you want to use when the solar panel is not working. You got to build another one. So you got to build double the solar size. In fact, that's not adequate, because in the early morning and late evening, you get very little. So you got to build a triple solar size. You got to build a triple solar size, of which 2 out of the 3 are charging the battery to use when the sun goes down. The same with wind. You would have extra wind turbines to charge the battery to use when the wind goes down. So this whole thing just becomes more and more and more complicated, and you start to get to a situation in Texas. I'm not saying it is entirely wind and solar to blame in Texas, but definitely they didn't take into account an adequate backup to have in this event. So then people, I've been seeing news items saying Texas must have a backup. Now, how do you have a backup? If you're on wind and solar, you can't have a wind and solar backup, because if the wind isn't there, there isn't any wind. So now your backup for your wind and solar has got to be something else, like coal or nuclear power. So now you get the ridiculous situation that you want to use wind and solar with nuclear and coal as a backup. If you're going to do that, why don't you just use the nuclear and the coal in the first place, which is what has been done for the past 100 years. In the case of coal, in the past half century, in the case of nuclear.
Right? You point to this addresses the systemic costs of these energy sources that wind and solar. Well, first off, wind and solar aren't designed as energy technologies. They're designed as climate technologies. Nobody
Yes.
trying to power an economy would say, gee, let's build windmills. The only thing that's driving anybody looking this way is concerns about CO2, which I want to ask you about. I just want to add my own comment on the systemic costs that you're bringing up. Is that many times the nameplate capacity is given for solar and people don't have in their mind a sense of what that's actually going to generate on an average basis. And since it's completely unreliable, the capital cost of the solar panels ignores the fact that you need that backup generation along with it to make it potentially useful. So then that's left out of the calculations of what's the price of energy from solar. They look at when the sun is shining, what does it cost to get power from this array without looking at the systemic costs of developing an unreliable grid that requires more transmission, more backup. Anyway, but let me ask you about the fact that these aren't actually energy technologies. They're driven by a concern about rising CO2 levels. What's your take on that? Is this something that we should be concerned about and reorganizing the entire industrial economy around?
Well, you're quite right about that. The solar and wind did not come about because engineering people sat down and said, this is a better bet. The solar and wind came about because of the CO2 demand to get rid of the carbon-based fuels. So it is a desperation measure. And I must say the people that have done the engineering on the solar and wind have done a very good job. Those wind turbines are beautiful. And they appear to be magic to some people. I must just tell you an amusing story from here. I was driving with two town councillors of a town near a new wind turbine farm. We were driving down the road, and I'm an amateur photographer. I like just taking pictures. I had my camera. It was a beautiful day. The sun was shining. There were a couple of wind turbines with the sun at the right angle. And I said to the fellows, do you mind if I just stop here and take some pictures? Because I like to keep them for presentations. No problem. So I got out there and I was taking pictures of the wind turbines. And the one town councillor said to me, isn't it amazing how these things work? I said, yes, it is. And I'm thinking to myself, the profile of the blade and the calculations of the gearbox ratios. And I'm saying, yeah, it is. It's amazing how it just turns around like that and shines electricity into your house with no cables necessary. So I said, wait a minute, what? And he says, yes, it just turns around and the electricity arrives in your house. So I said, no, it doesn't. There's cables there. And he said, really? And I said, yes, they're under the ground. And then he said, oh. And I said, where on earth did you get that story from? So he said, no, well, the Greenpeace people came around to them and said, you know how the cell phones work? There's a tower in your phone and it just talks with no wires. And I said, yes. He said, well, it's the same with a wind turbine.
Wow.
And I said, good heavens, you've been told that. And this is why so many of the lower social bracket people of the area were advocating the wind, because they had this belief that this thing's just going to turn around and shine free electricity into your house. Then the other fellow said, yes, we're waiting for the electricity price to drop because they told us it's going to go down when the wind gets here. I said, but it's not. The price goes into the general mix of the utility which is selling it to you. There's no price reduction is going to occur because the wind's here. In fact, here in South Africa, the wind and solar have been far more expensive than has the current nuclear power. So I thought to myself, golly, and also what happens is, of course, is that all the wind is built higher up to catch the wind. So whenever you see wind under construction, the underground cables are above. You're not looking into a valley. So I thought to myself, I've never seen the underground cables when I'm driving down the road. As it happened to that trip, I asked to go onto one of the sites and the chief engineer took me on a private tour around the entire construction site. But I thought, good heavens, I wonder how many people have this belief that somehow the wind turbine is just shining electricity through the air like a cell phone. But this is indicative of so much misunderstanding that the public have got. And sadly, a lot of it deliberately propagated by the extreme anti-nuclear and extreme green organizations that go out and tell them the batteries, which they like to call storage, as if it's something unusual, are just going to solve the problem. And they're not. And I frequently find myself in social occasions chatting to people, and I'm staggered at the completely incorrect impressions that they've got about how all the energies work. So I believe that by far the majority of the public are voting off a basis of not a clue of what's actually going on. And this is a serious social problem. How do you get the people to actually understand what they're talking about when they start to have an opinion that affects their own destiny?
You know, because people see new wind developments, because people see solar, because people hear about it a lot, and people hear about the technological improvements in these areas, which certainly, you know, as inefficient and expensive as wind and solar are today, they are better than they were 10 years ago, which isn't saying that much for what their future role should be. In the United States, for example, nuclear power is seen as almost an old technology, as though windmills, which, as you brought up, saw their heyday in Holland centuries ago, are a new one. We've seen basically zero greenfield, you know, entirely new nuclear development in the United States over decades. And I think that gives people an out-of-date view of the technology. You had brought up how wind and solar have improved. How has nuclear technology, how has nuclear science advanced over the last 50 years since nuclear power, you know, came online as a new technology? Where is this technology headed? Where is it going?
Well, I'm very glad you mentioned that, because, of course, that is also a strange human phenomenon as well, that everybody seems to think that scientists put a lot of effort into wind and solar, but somehow they don't do it with nuclear at the same time. We see the Perseverance rover landing on Mars. We see all these fantastic advances, but people assume that somehow nuclear stood still, but it certainly hasn't. Around the world, a number of countries have raced ahead. Of course, one of the images that's in the minds of people is Fukushima. Now, Fukushima was what was known as a category 2 nuclear development, and it was an early category 2. It was near the end of its life, heading for retirement anyway. Then what happened is the biggest earthquake on record smacked into the neighborhood, followed by the biggest tsunami on record that smacked into the neighborhood, and the water jumped the protection of the reactor. The reactor suffered a core meltdown, in fact, more than one, and all the worst things possible could happen. The cooling the reactor, by the way, switched off like it was supposed to. When the earthquake occurred, Fukushima switched off. It did everything correctly. If the water hadn't arrived about an hour later, everything probably would have been okay. When the water arrived, it came in and it wiped away the power lines that were bringing in electricity to run the cooling pumps. It also washed away the diesel supplies, which were in tanks sitting out in the car park or something at the back. So these fellows were hit with an absolute barrage of the worst conceivable set of circumstances. There was a meltdown, there was this, there was that. Notwithstanding all of that, there was not one single death at Fukushima from nuclear radiation. There was not one single human injury from nuclear radiation at Fukushima. No private property was harmed by nuclear radiation at all. I wrote an article that was published in Washington. In fact, the editor chose the title something to the effect that I say that Fukushima was not a nuclear accident. There was a barrage of reaction to that. But in fact, Fukushima was not a nuclear accident. It was a Fukushima industrial accident like would have happened at the airport, at the car factory, at anywhere else. The fact that it happened to be at a nuclear plant doesn't make the airport at Fukushima, that got wiped out by the tsunami as well, doesn't turn that into an aircraft crash. It turns it into an airport smashed up. There was an oil refinery down the coast as well that was also hit, and it burst into flame, and that picture is often used as supposedly Fukushima on fire, which it isn't. But there was no radiation effects. Even an investigation afterwards by 28 countries looked into any potential long-term effects for genetic damage and that, and they found there wouldn't be any. So there you take a bad reactor that is out of date, badly run, it turns out. They had some bad management and so on that came out later. You do the worst you can, and it shows you how incredibly safe it is. Meantime, we're now up in the big reactors. We happen to what's called generation 3+. There's even yet a newer one of small modular reactors, which is generation 4. They're completely different. The generation 3 and 3+ reactors now use a lot of natural physics for safety. So, for example, if something happens, there's automatic water up at the top under gravity that will run through the reactor by itself. It doesn't need the pumps like it used to. The people got clever. There's reactors where there will be plugs at the bottom that automatically open with certain small modular reactors to allow the fuel to run out into a safe mode and so on. So there's a huge amount of advance that has taken place. So comparing any modern reactor with Fukushima is like comparing a modern Ferrari with a Model T Ford. It's completely unrealistic. And you're quite right. The images that in the US, for example, that has stopped, it hasn't. Westinghouse developed very good reactor designs. But yes, there have been brakes put on in the Western world. Meantime, the Russians have gone ahead. The Chinese have gone ahead. The South Africans are pushing forward now. The South Koreans, India is going ahead on building extra reactors. So you find there's a lot of movement taking place in the eastern part of the world and the non-first world Western countries. And that's where a lot of progress has taken place. Just recently in the UAE, they started extracting electricity from their first nuclear power plant called Baraka. It's got 4 reactors. Interestingly, of the staff that have put the Baraka plant together, there's over 140 South Africans, including the heads of all the reactors, including the head of engineering, are all South Africans that were trained here. And they're all saying, well, as soon as their contract's up, they're coming home and they want to work on nuclear here. That was the UAE's first venture into nuclear. So they had all the legislation and all the procedural stuff to go through with the International Atomic Energy Agency and so on. But there they're going ahead. The Baraka one was delivered effectively on time and on budget. It came out right where we wanted it to be and where we expected it to be. But you'll never find it used as a benchmark. They'll always look around the anti-nuclear to find somewhere that for some reason or other went over budget and over. Like there was one in Finland, there were problems because of all sorts of procedural reasons and so on, and it went over budget. And people are forever using that reactor as an illustration, but not the Baraka one. Why not? This shows an intention to deceive and not to be honest, and that's a great pity. But yes, the reactor advances have been dramatic, and the small modular reactors, which we can discuss in a few minutes, I'm sure you'll go there.
Yes, well, you know, when you brought up in Finland, for example, or here in the United States, one of the major costs in the nuclear reactors that have been either built or completed in the recent period, essentially expanding old sites, one of the major costs is litigation, the delay, the drawing out the completion of these projects, the carrying the finance costs the whole time. You know, these aren't physical costs. This is related to policy and this sort of thing. But on the physical aspect of nuclear power, these are very complex systems. I mean, you describe these passive safety mechanisms with the water tanks up top, with plugs that melt and to drain out fuel to cool safely. It seems very complex. Yet, despite this complexity, nuclear power is inexpensive. That is, the power that it's generated in terms of the labor costs and everything else to produce the fuel and run the plant is actually quite low. So why is nuclear power so efficient? Why can these relatively tiny amounts of fuel, small pellets of uranium, why are they able to achieve the same kind of power output as, let's say, a coal plant being fed trainloads of coal, or an enormous plane full of windmills? Why is nuclear so efficient?
Well, there's just such an incredible amount of power in nuclear. This is the thing, it's absolutely mind-boggling. I think people are all familiar, I'm sure you guys in the US as well know about kilojoules in your cornflakes. I don't know if that's common over there, but here
we use calories.
All the ladies know how many kilojoules there are in the cornflakes, or how many kilojoules in this, that, and the other when you're on diet. Now, if you you just jack it up by 1,000 and you call it megajoules per kilogram, you'll find that sugar is about 20, all right? And then coal is about 25. So coal has got marginally more energy in it than sugar. Petrol, which you guys call gas, is about twice the amount of coal. That's about 50. Nuclear, that's uranium, is 76 million. So we're talking about coal having twice the amount of energy, or a bit more energy than sugar, and petrol or gas, your gas that you put in a motor car, having about twice the amount of energy in it as coal. But there's 76 million for nuclear. You can get 3 baseballs of uranium for example, that in fact uranium fuel, that's not even full 100% uranium. And that will supply enough energy for a human being for your entire lifetime for everything. So you can hold in your two hands in uranium energy for a lifetime. If somebody said, please bring around in coal my energy for a lifetime, your whole house would disappear in a pyramid of coal standing above the house. So the amount of energy that is in nuclear is absolutely mind-boggling. And this is why you can build a very small nuclear reactor. By small, what I mean is on a football field, you can build a nuclear reactor to supply an entire large town. If you want to supply an entire large town with wind and solar, you're talking about area much larger than the town by far. So you've got to have acres and acres and acres of land to put solar on, and then it's got to be facing the sun, which means you can't have it on slopes that are not facing the sun unless you now have a complex gimbal mechanism that the solar follows the sun like that, which just adds to your costs, adds to your complexity, and so on. So it is just surprising. Now, I want to emphasize, I've never ever said that I'm opposed to solar and wind. I made a policy decision that for myself. I've never said I'm opposed to solar and wind for uses for which they are applicable. But I have said they are no good for base load electricity for a country. You can't expect to have them be very reliable. Here in South Africa, we have some of the biggest and certainly the deepest mines in the world. I've been to the bottom of the deepest hole on the planet that is possible for a human being to go to. That's a couple of kilometers below sea level. And down in those big South African mines, you have 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 people on shift at a time, 4 kilometers below the surface of the earth. You can't have 4,000 people kilometers underground and the electricity fails and somebody says, sorry, fellows, the wind isn't blowing. It's just far too big a risk. You can kill too many people. You've got to know that the powerful electricity is there all of the time. Now, earlier, Jason, you made a point that I wanted to react to back then. Something that people forget is that electricity is sold as two different things. One is the amount of electricity that you buy, but the other is the service aspect, the time when you flick the switch. Let's compare it with water. Say somebody says to you, I can give you cheaper water than you can get anywhere else, but you have to go down to the river with a bucket and fetch it and carry it up. Then you say, no, wait a minute, I want a tap. No, he says, a tap is a different matter. You have to pay for a tap, and the water is a different price to having the tap. So now you got the choice. You can either have a tap in your house that is available to shower, bath, put coffee water in and stuff like that, or you can pick up a bucket and go out somewhere and fetch it. Or you can wait for somebody with a tanker to come around to your house 2 or 3 times a week, maybe, and unload it from a tanker into a storage bin, which you have. Now you say, what would you prefer? Now everybody's going to say, I'd much rather just have the tap if I were to get up in the middle of the night. They don't seem to realize it's the same with electricity. If you get up at midnight and you decide you want a cup of coffee and you want to turn the light on, you want to flick the light switch and switch on the coffee. You can't say, well, you're on solar, so I'm afraid you haven't got any. That person says, wait, I want to buy solar power because I want to be morally in the right place, but I want it to work in the middle of the night. Then you say, well, then you've got to pay a different price. You've now got to pay for that solar to be stored in the battery, in the this, in the that. And when you see the Texas illustration, part of what happened is them trying to do just that. And this is because of the wrong philosophy that they're trying to follow. And this is where society has got to get its brain in the right groove to decide, what do we want? If we're looking for doubling of the world electricity consumption, we better decide exactly how are we going to do this. And us people in Africa are not prepared to sit here with some countries having 20% electrification, some countries having 15% electrification. Then people come here from Switzerland and come here from Germany and says, be happy the way you are, save the planet and don't advance, which is what has happened. They come here and tell people, do not go for more electricity, stay the way you are because you're doing good for the planet. You say, sorry, I want to live like you Swiss live. I want to live like everybody lives. Now, South Africa, we see this. It's the most interesting country. We have at the leading edge of South Africa, we have the most advanced first world systems. We had cell phone texting 2 years before the United States did, by the way. I demonstrated it in the US Senate. I had a whole crowd of people around me when I went to give a Senate presentation, fascinated to find I could send a text message on my phone. And it was a recollection of mine. We had GSM cell phone technology 2 years before you did. We got very advanced systems here. At the other end of the spectrum, we've still got people living out in the bush in mud huts. So we see what it's like to see from the front end of the first world to a very developing world element in one country. So we know very well that there are many people in Africa that are still living in mud hut conditions or a little bit better than that with no electrification. The first world can't morally tell them to stay living in mud huts, to not have electrification in the local clinics, to not have proper education systems, because the Germans are telling you to save the planet according to their rules. You can't do that.
So, wow, very exciting. Let me ask about your interest in technology. You're clearly a talented person. You've had an interesting, and you've been leading an interesting, successful life. I'm sure many fields lay open to you as a young man in terms of thinking of where you would go. What drew you to the field of nuclear technology?
Well, when I was at university, I was studying physics, and I was fascinated with physics during my undergraduate time. Then as I became a graduate student, there were various options, and I gravitated towards the nuclear aspects because it seemed like good fun. It seemed like the new world, where at that stage they were even looking at nuclear-powered space engines, which they're going back to now, spacecraft. There were all sorts of nuclear options and so on. And I ended up following the nuclear path. Since then, I've not only been interested in nuclear power, but for example, nuclear medicine. During my term of office as chairman of the South African Nuclear Energy Corporation, we became the second biggest nuclear medicine supplier to the world, by the way, so exporting to over 60 countries, a major customer being the United States. So nuclear medicine that was made in Pretoria was injected into a United States patient in the US the following day. And this was done, we did 3 exports per day continuously, 365 days a year. We had the only nuclear reactor here near Pretoria that ran 365 days a year producing medicine, except for occasions when you had to switch it off for refueling purposes and so on. But other than that, it just ran, not only producing medicine, it also made the world's best silicon chips for silicon chip technology into cell phones and so on, which are made by radiation. So this was going on all of the time. Nuclear is used in agriculture. There's, do you know the grapefruit that is called the ruby red grapefruit, the pink ones that has come about because of nuclear. Do you know that that's a nuclear grapefruit? The red exists because of nuclear.
Hold on, how is that a nuclear grapefruit? Explain that for us.
The nuclear radiation was used to do some modifications of the grapefruit, and they came out with red ones. Every time you eat a red grapefruit, that's now came from nuclear inducement. There's numbers of others as well. I can tell you more, but you can also use nuclear as tracers. Now, one huge advantage of nuclear, which is also used against us, is that it is so easy to find. If you take a fraction of the head of a match of arsenic, for example, and go and drop it outside on the lawn, it will be a huge battle to find it. If you take the same volume of something that's radioactive and drop it in the lawn, it's dead easy to find it. It's like a cricket going squeak, 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 squeak. You just go out with a Geiger counter and walk around, and a tiny little bit of something radioactive will say, here I am, here I am, here I am. It'll tell you. So you can use it as tracers. If you want to find where airflows go, for example, you can take a minute amount, a couple of liters of radioactive gas, which is totally harmless, let it into the air, let it flow, and hundreds of kilometers later, you'll pick it up. Here in Pretoria, when the Chinese used to do nuclear weapons tests in the days before the ban, about 3 days after the Chinese nuclear weapons tests, we would detect the radiation passing over Pretoria from the Chinese nuclear tests. Here we use it to monitor water flows, for example. If you want to see where currents go down the coast, you put a tiny bit of radioactive liquid and it flows past. Now, where that sensitivity is used against us at times is the green scream, we found radiation. And you say, yes, but you found radiation that is so mild, it's irrelevant. You know, every human body has arsenic in it as a necessary trace element. You need it in your body. Now, I could go to the local morgue that is nearby you and do some tests and then announce to the press, every single body in the local morgue has got arsenic in it. There's a wild arsenic poisoner on the loose in your neighborhood, you see. That is true, but the amount of arsenic is so small to be irrelevant. Granite tops that you find in kitchens, I imagine they're common there too, like they are here. They are radioactive. If you hold a Geiger counter above it, you're radioactive. Bananas are naturally radioactive. There's even a thing in physics called the BED, which is the banana equivalent dose. And it's not a joke. You know, people smile at it, but it's actually known in physics as a thing called the banana equivalent dose. So a bowl of bananas on a granite top is radioactive. Certainly anywhere near enough for you to be concerned about it. You can sit there and eat it quite happily. There's no problem. But it's the type of thing somebody can get a Geiger counter that, good heavens, Jason has got a radioactive kitchen. He's got bananas on a granite top. And this is the type of false information that is propagated by the anti-nuclear lobby. They will tell you that radiation from Fukushima arrived at the United States, for example. There's some measure of truth in that, because if you put up an incredibly sensitive detector, you'll find a couple of atoms going past. It doesn't mean that there's anything even remotely to worry about. There's a daily background count. If you just walk outside and just hold a Geiger counter, you'll hear it purring quite loudly and with quite a high frequency, incidentally. The first time I ever heard it, I was astounded. You hear the particles coming past, you hear tick, 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 tick. Not one tick every minute or something. It's tick, 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 tick. And that's the natural radiation. If you fly in an airplane, you get a lot more because you're higher up and you haven't got the air screening you from the radiation coming in from outer space. So one must understand that there's very little fear about radiation. I would like to compare nuclear radiation to something like military ammunition or explosives in the mines. South Africa lets off an immense number of detonations every day. We're something like the 4th highest, or some huge figure because of the mining here. There's mining explosives moving around all day long. That is done by professionals in a very professional manner. There's very specific rules and regulations how to. You wouldn't sit in the local dynamite store and light your cigarette. You just don't do things like that. You don't go into a nuclear fuel storage or a nuclear waste thing and sit on a fuel element. You don't do daft things. You don't go into a military ammunition store and play your xylophone on an artillery shell. And so so often the accusations are on the assumption that all nuclear people are utterly irresponsible fools who are going to drop nuclear waste in the streets and they don't know what they're doing. And, you know, it's just so foolish. And so, you know, I'd really appeal to the public, have some confidence in the professionalism. You believe professional cardiologists are going to open your heart properly if you go. Professional nuclear people are also professional. They do the same thing. They're not irresponsible fools.
So let me, Dr. Kemm, let me ask you this, I think to sort of finish off our discussion here. Looking forward into the future, let's say 50 years into the future, could you describe how the world, or Africa in particular, would look in 50 years if we embark on a process of developing new technology, nuclear fission, and eventually bring on nuclear fusion as well? Could you contrast that image 50 years from now with how the world or Africa will appear in 50 years if we decide to increasingly rely on windmills, solar, the so-called renewable energy sources?
Well, I think if we rely on the solar and wind, there's going to be endless problems because of the size of Africa and also of this integration of these variances, you know, having day and night and wind blowing and not blowing. You're just asking for trouble when you try and let a country run on that. If it's a little bit of bonus, it's one thing. If you're letting the country run on that, you're asking for trouble. Now what we have is not only the new bigger reactors that are much more advanced, like 1,000 megawatt reactors, 1,500 megawatt reactors. We also have the small modular reactor class, which are like 100 megawatts, which are like 5 or 10% the size of a big reactor. There's two basic brackets then. One of them is water-cooled reactors, which run at about 250 or 300 degrees Celsius. And then high temperature gas reactors. South Africa designed one called the pebble bed modular reactor with an output temperature of 940. And then there was another one designed in Pretoria called the HTMR 100, which they brought it down to 750, which has got a lot of advantages because you can build it quicker and cheaper. Now, those reactors do not need water. When we did it, it was so we don't have to be near the sea, and we don't need to be near a big body of water, because many African countries, being very large, do not have water. So you've got to allow for arid area. Texas should be asking, I don't know how much water there is in Texas, but I always have this feeling of Texas being a rather, from the cowboy days, dust and cattle trails and whatever. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's lots of water I don't know about.
For large portions of it, that's true.
But the small modular reactors is the answer, not only for African countries. In fact, when I was in Minneapolis, I was asked to give a presentation on small modular reactors there because the state authorities were interested in looking into them, and it was some years ago already. But Indonesia is very interested. Indonesia is a set of islands, and there's water in between, so it becomes difficult. The head of Indonesian Nuclear said to me, how do we run cables between one island and another? We can't do that. We can't have an Indonesian grid in the conventional sense of the word. And I thought, good heavens, that's a good point. So the market for small modular reactors is phenomenal. And I just see you refuel one of these, a big reactor, every 18 months. So once it's refueled, it runs for 18 months. The small modular reactors that we've designed here, you never refuel them in the sense that you have to switch them off. You keep feeding new fuel in because the fuel is a ball about as big as a baseball. The ones designed here, the fuel designed and manufactured in Pretoria, is about as big as a baseball and has 9 grams of enriched uranium in it. And 3 or 4 of those balls will sort out one individual for a lifetime's worth of electricity. You drop the balls in, and then there's a mechanism to check them to see if the ball's burnt up. And when the ball is used up, you take it out and you put another one in. So the reactor can run effectively forever. You can also stockpile the fuel. Now, that would be a political and economic decision. There's no ways you can stockpile coal. The stockpile here in South Africa, we try and stockpile coal at coal-fired power stations. And the plan is to try and have 2 weeks buffer. Now, 2 weeks coal is like one of the pyramids of Egypt, virtually. But you can stockpile on site the nuclear fuel for years if you want. All you got to do is buy it and then get international agreement that you can have that amount of enriched uranium in bunkers or whatever. And if you get rainstorms that happen and wash the road away or wash the railway line away or something, it does not switch off your reactor. Whereas if you've got a coal-fired power station that relies on trains arriving every couple of hours or a conveyor belt continuously bringing coal into the one good African storm with a good flood of water is going to potentially wash away your railway line or your road. And those are, when I've spoken to African leaders, they say, we can't risk doing that. They can't risk bringing trains over borders. One Minister of Energy I spoke to a while ago said to get coal to his country, they'd have to cross 4 international borders. He said that's politically unacceptable to bring fuel over 4 borders. What are you going to do? And there's very limited hydro power here because of the rainfall, but also because the dams here are like big saucers. They're not like the Norwegian dams, which are vertical like this with snow and water runoff. Here, they're like big saucers, and when they start to evaporate, you lose half of your water and half of your pressure head very quickly. So to my mind, small modular reactors is the answer for most African countries and for many other countries around the world. Those that want bigger power can get bigger reactors if they can put them near a source of water, such as the sea, or come up with some other cooling option that you have to take into account. But I just see the face of Africa will be changed by nuclear power, because they need to double and double again the electricity, and you're not going to do that with solar and wind. I'm sorry.
Dr. Kemm, thank you so much. This has been a real pleasure, very informative, you've got a green power stand-up routine here, I think. So I want to really thank you for being with us today. I think that covers the topics we wanted to address with you, and I think that what you've given us, what you've given to our viewers in terms of an ability to think more deeply and with with a better background about energy sources, energy reliability, the future, and what it will take to dramatically increase energy usage rather than hold it steady or decrease it, as some people are calling for. I think that this really shows the impossibility of trying to adopt the the Great Reset goals of eliminating carbon dioxide through the use of renewable power with the development goals for the world of completely eliminating poverty, industrializing, having quality living standards for every person on this planet, you can't have both. And I think it's clear which of those we ought to choose for the future of our species. So Dr. Kemm, thank you again. Thank you very much for joining us.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and all the best for your endeavors into the future.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.